We're at CRT 2014, and we're talking about the CoreValve system by Medtronic. It received US FDA approval about 1 month ago from where we stand here at the end of February. Approval without the need for an independent device advisory panel review, which is kind of unique, and we'll talk about that, and the data that really kind of gives us more insight into what optimal outcomes are with TAVR. I'm with Dr. Jeffrey Popma, MD, Director of the Interventional Cardiology Department at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston. First off, congratulations.
Great, thank you.
To get through all of that as you did over a period of time and no review. Talk first about the approval, because it's the entire platform, correct, that got approved?
It is, and I think that it's almost sometimes limited to a soundbite, but it's not a soundbite at all. It's about 3 years of work by very dedicated individuals that have gone into this. Really starting for the first patient that was implanted in December of 2010, at a time when we really understood that in patients who had no surgical options, that aortic stenosis was a fatal disease, 50% mortality at 1 year in patients who couldn't be treated. So we really went into our extreme risk study understanding that without treatment, these patients were truly desperate. So with that, we recruited over 470 patients into a study that clearly had patients who were deemed by 2 surgeons at the clinical sites and confirmed by 2 surgeons on a national screening committee to have no options other than treatment with the valve. We also came into this with our clinical sites having no experience with transcatheter valve replacement at all. And of course, it's different today, 3 years later, because at least 300 sites around the country have experience with transcatheter valve. But back then, 3 years ago, we didn't. So we really worked together as a clean investigative team of 40 sites, of surgeons and interventionalists, European proctors who taught us how to do the case themselves, and over a period of the year recruitment that we did with this, really understood how best to treat patients with this therapy.
And you really beat expectations dramatically.
Well, again, it's the first of several different sets of information that are going to come out about the CoreValve device. And so we did beat the performance goal. Those are always tricky to perform, but I think that we collected enough information about these patients to understand that they were truly comorbid and they were truly frail and they were very disabled, and they didn't really have any options for surgical therapy. So with that, the valve worked. It had very predictable implantation rates. The residual gradients were very low. The stroke rate we found major stroke rate was 2.4% at 30 days. We were very satisfied with that number. That was low. We had a pacemaker rate of about 22% and change. And all of those things for us meant that we actually could perform this. What was surprising to us as part of this was that we had, over time, a very low paravalvular regurgitation rate. Of course, as you know, that's been one of the limitations of therapy, that we put in these round valves and these very eccentric holes, and there's a little bit of leaking that goes around the side of them. But we found that moderate or severe paravalvular regurgitation occurred in only less than 1 in 20 patients at 1 year. So that was a very favorable number for us.
And the expectation, I think, was considerably higher than that going in.
It was, but this is the first time when you do a trial, it's the first time you really have the data, which is had a core laboratory review it and looked at all the echocardiograms serially, and independent events committees that adjudicated all the events. So it was a trial. And as a result of being a rigorous trial, we got a lot more information than we had before.
And it went through the FDA maybe a little faster without the need for a review panel?
Well, yeah, and I guess I would be careful to say that that the FDA process is a modular submission process.
That's
so the last piece of data was to say, does this valve work with reasonable assurance of safety and efficacy in the intended population? The intended population were those patients who didn't have any options. And so I think that based on the preclinical work, the modular submission that had really been going on for 3.5 years, that when the FDA was able to then see the data and see how meticulous it was collected, they could make that decision. But again, I don't think it was an easy decision for them. I think that there was a lot of work that went in the scenes behind, lots of communication back and forth for years. And the last phase of the modular submission was, of course, the clinical data.
And the data really should tell us something about what optimal TAVR response outcomes is, correct?
Well, not only the outcomes, but more importantly, how you optimally perform the procedure. So we use these terms called best practices.
Right.
And I think that's a tired term somehow because people use it and say we want to do, oh, everybody wants to do best practice. But we actually learned from studying the outcomes of this trial by using CTs to size the valve itself, to carefully assess the degree of regurgitation after implantation, to fix that if we can, that the best practices really drive the outcomes. And that's really what we can teach. I mean, so it's by coming up with what we believe are the best ways that one can implant the valve. All patients are different, but if we follow the rules, do the best practices, we're very happy with the type of outcomes we've gotten.
Terrific. And to read more about this, please go to CardioSource World News, CardioSource World News Interventions. I'm Rick McGuire, Executive Editor.